Okay, today's topic, emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy. You know, I give you that topic especially with men, and they don't like it. Most men don't like this idea of emotional intimacy. And I don't blame you. I think it makes us feel uncomfortable. And yet in a love relationship, unless you understand and know your partner on an emotionally intimate level, they don't make sense. And yet we have a society right now where a lot of us really don't know how to be emotional. Now, one thing that I find with men, and I'm going to pick on men because there are women too that confuse this, there's a big difference between intimate and being close to someone. Big difference in my mind. It's been heartbreaking at times to work with men and women that have been married 5 or 6 years. And he, because of his macho, strong, disciplined attitude, doesn't believe that it's healthy or noble for a man to tell a woman about his innermost secrets and feelings. That's intimacy. And yet, as they go through the walk of life pretending to be emotionally intimate, they're not. He doesn't make sense to her. She doesn't make sense to him because they don't know what's going on an emotional level. And so they often confuse. We're not intimate. We're not intimate. Emotional intimacy in a relationship, especially a love marital relationship, as a byproduct, there's sex. And I am often dismayed, if not absolutely mystified, by the number of people that I've worked with that have confused physical sex is not an indication of emotional intimacy. And yet I find a lot of people really confuse that. They're involved in physical relationships. We do share rent. We do share financial responsibilities. We do share responsibilities for raising the children. But we have no exchange of emotional intimacies. And with that, at times, you really don't make sense to me. I really don't know who you are. Just as I gave you that example about the man in the office, when he told them, I don't want it, I'm not receiving that phone call, I don't want to talk to her, to them, he didn't make sense. To me, he did. Understand, when you're in a love relationship, emotional intimacy is paramount. To disclose to you my innermost feelings, those things that are important, the things that you need to know, because as we do that, we share in this idea of a shared emotional identity. Remember, as you disclose to me those things that are important to you, those feelings and emotions that are psychologically anchored that have made up who you are, as I disclose to you those feelings and emotions, those anchored psychological feelings and emotions of who I am, now we relate to each other. See, that's what a shared emotional identity is. I can share because I can relate. I understand. I know. You make sense to me. I love you. That's what a shared emotional understanding is. And if you remember, it's one of those 9 characteristics in a love relationship that I ask you to think about if in fact you're in a love relationship. But I'm also going to tell you, when we have emotional intimacy going on and it's healthy, there's some risk factors. There's some things that will destroy an emotionally intimate relationship. And I get real concerned about people that misuse emotions. You know, in our society, we're often pushed to extremes. We're working 40 hours a week, and then we commute 1 hour both ways in the morning and the afternoon. And we have children to pick up at daycare and clothing to launder and food to prepare. And we really get stressed out. And at times, we don't live in this emotional acknowledgement of our intimate relationship because we're just so busy paddling the boat that we don't have time to enjoy the trip. And yet here I am struggling day to day, and at times I start to measure myself and you, not by the things you do, but by the things you didn't do. Honey, did you drop off the laundry? No. Again? You didn't drop it off again? What's the problem here? How many times? What are you? There's something wrong with you? See, and when we begin to misuse emotions, make someone feel guilty by the things that they didn't do because you make them feel like they betrayed you, that relationship starts to fall apart. And as I remind you over and over again of all the things that you have done or didn't do that are disrupting this relationship, call that scorecarding, I'm giving you a sense of guilt till finally I make so many mistakes. I don't just feel guilty about the mistakes that I do, but I tend to feel awful because I make so many mistakes, I don't think I can do anything right. And now that's shame. See the difference between guilt and shame? Guilt is I made a mistake. Shame is I make so many mistakes, I am a mistake. When you graduate to shame, the relationship is over. I don't want to be around you. Remember, emotional intimacy, love. I love you. I love to be with you. When I am with you, I'm a better person. What happens when that turns around to when I'm with you, all you do is condemn me and point out what I did wrong? I'm not a better person. I'm a human failure. And I've graduated to feeling bad about myself on a typical day. In fact, I look in the mirror and all I do is think about the things you told me that I didn't do right. Guilt and shame. So there's some real easy ways to destroy an emotionally intimate relationship, and I'll give you one. Point out all these errors. Let them know what they are on a day-to-day basis. Remind them, not just the ones you're making now, but all the ones across the past. And then group them all together and show a pattern. Because at some point, I'm going to remind you so much that you're going to feel so bad about yourself that at some point, I beat you down to that level of being ashamed. Remember, love. I enjoy being with you because you bring out the best in me. Divorce. When I'm with you, I feel awful. When I'm with you, you remind me of everything I've done wrong. Long before the legal divorce occurs, the emotional divorce happened. I divorce you emotionally a year, 6 months out, and then I start looking for ways to get away from you. Okay? So we can beat our relationships down, and there are ways to destroy it, indirectly, verbal and nonverbal. Criticism. Remember, it's not what I say, it's how I make it feel about what I say. Sometimes I don't have to say anything. I can just radiate by facial expressions. Okay? Understand, though, at times that we get pretty destructive as we beat people up. And know that when we get out of hand, sometimes relationships go to that level of last resort. Pushing and shoving. I did a study, it's about 3 or 4 years ago, where I had 200 men. It was confidential. There was no way no one could know what the results would be. And it was my experience at that time that 75% of those men all admitted that they had gotten into wrestling matches, physical altercations with their partner. They were ashamed of it. They didn't like to think of it. It was an embarrassment, a failure in the relationship. But just remember, when you and I get into it and we physically jostle, hit, strike, slap, punch, push, you name it, often the memory of that physical act, that physical disgrace, the violating my space and pushing on me, long exceeds what you've ever imagined. A few years ago, Carrie and I had a case that we both worked on that was it was awful. 2 times she explained to us she woke up on the floor. 1 time she saw the punch coming. 1 time she didn't. You can't hurt me enough when you slap me. You can't hurt me enough by your punch. But the memory of what you did lasts a long time. And she said to us, she said, you know what? I would wake up on the floor and I could heal from the busted lip, but I never healed from the memory of the busted lip. I never healed from not knowing where it was coming from. See, and that's the ultimate indication that emotional intimacy is gone. We're losing this edge because now the frustration and hostility has risen to such a level that we're pushing and we're shoving. So I'm going to tell you right now that there's ways to ruin a relationship. Number 1 is, hey, put the physical relationship above the emotional relationship. In a healthy love relationship, emotional intimacy, when it's founded, there's a byproduct, and that's a sexual relationship. I know a lot of men that I've had in my office think that, hey, sex is something you owe me now that we're married. Isn't that awful? I've heard it, had it said. I had a man in my office tell me that it was her fault that he had an affair. She's not giving me sex. My dad tells me it's her fault because now that we're married, it's my right. Sex in any relationship is a privilege, not a right. It's a privilege, okay? Understand that when we take and we put the physical over the emotional, you're ruining that relationship. Understand when you don't disclose to someone about your anchored feelings and emotions, about your past, about your love, not just negative things, positive things, your passions, your expressions of joy, the goals that you have. These are all important things. Now I relate those to my partner, and that's how we build emotional partnership. Understand that relationships go down when we pull away from each other and we forget that the day-to-day chores and activities and all the maintenance things that we do tend to isolate us from our passion for each other. And if we put too much value in this effort of the conflict we have in our day-to-day activities of getting the laundry done and getting the kids taken care of, if we put too much emphasis on that, we can delude ourselves. We can forget why we're together. And I think it's important to understand those are reasons that relationships fall apart. Now let me tell you some ideas about how to improve a